Show me what you got.
The last week is finally here. One more time here on To Be Frank. I'm Jake Reiser.
I'm Dan Schulman.
And I'm Jordan Tebow.
And for the final week of the seminar, we had Greg Bedard of currently unaffiliated. He hopefully figures out where he's going to be soon. And Ben Watanabe of Nesson. And it was a great wrap-up for the whole semester. I think having both of those people, one who's certainly younger and one who's had a lot of experience, it was a great wrap-up holistically to just sum up everything that we had learned.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed both of the guests, and Greg had so many stories about all the teams that he's covered, all the different big stories that he's covered, little stories he's covered. And he really offered a lot of information to us, young aspiring journalists, and just how to tackle a story that might be bigger than yourself, like he was talking about with the Saban story. And also Ben, Ben had a lot of good things to say about Nesson and the way they run things. And so yeah, I mean, both of the guests, very valuable information that they shared with us.
And I think one of the things that resonated most with me is something that Greg Bedard said right off the start of the seminar last week. And it was pour everything you have into every story you do. And it doesn't really matter how big or small the story. It could be a 400-word, quick little game recap, or it could be a long-form feature about a player who has overcome a lot of adversity to get to where he is today. It doesn't matter. You pour everything you have into every story and put the same amount of effort into everything. It's the same thing that's preached to athletes, so sports journalists should also follow that same sort of credo.
You have to have passion in this industry. You won't make it unless you do. It doesn't matter, like Greg Bedard said, whether it's high school sports, whether it's some completely random league like American League Baseball somewhere. You have to have passion or else your readers are going to know and they're just going to completely tune out and it's going to work against you and it's just going to become a job. We're so fortunate that we work in sports because it doesn't feel like a job. You're around these teams and you're around the players and you just love what you do every single day. But you have to make sure it stays that way or else you're just going to lose a lot of your standing. You're going to lose a lot of the love you have for this industry. You're going to lose so much.
Yeah, and like Professor Shore said in his blog post, at the very end he says, so don't get too high, don't get too low. Every story is a big one to somebody. Tell them something they don't already know and you'll do just fine. And that really echoes what Greg was saying, and also Ben. I think he was kind of fuzzy on it, but I think he said that he followed Mike Trout when he was in Little League.
I think so.
Yeah, he mentioned Mike Trout's name like in passing, but I wasn't able to really hammer it down that he was the one who found out Mike Trout. But I guess that's how it happened. So. Like, every story is a big one to somebody in whatever market you're in. Just like, who do we have? Tom Lydon, and he was talking about pony basketball or donkey basketball and, state wrestling. So whatever market you're in, just find out, what their niche is, what they love, and just tackle everything. Like you said, just pour everything into it.
Well, that's like Ben Watanabe, too, starting Nesson Fuel, and they hired him in-house, and it's become a big thing for them.
Yeah, and another thing that Greg Bedard even said was that if you were a fan of a team, how would you want the team covered? Like, what angle would you want? Find an angle that you won't get anywhere else. Professor Shore said it in his blog post. Greg Bedard said it in the seminar, and I think even Ben alluded to it that, versatility is huge, and covering sports makes it more difficult to be a fan, but you still have to have that fan sort of perspective in order to figure out what you need to write, what needs to be covered.
That's why it was interesting to hear Ben that he just doesn't cheer anymore, that he's taken such a journalistic approach to it. I feel like I'm going to maintain some sort of fandom for as long as I can, because just making sure that you have some amount of passion and stake in this really ensures that you're always going to be invested in it.
Yeah, and even Greg Bedard said the same, that he has lost some of it, but he still maintains a fandom for some of the teams he used to follow. I think he was talking about when he followed the Marlins down in Florida,
the Dolphins for sure,
especially. And I can see myself definitely holding fandoms in the future, but when it comes to covering sports, you need to maintain professionalism. There's a difference between being a fan and being a journalist, and I think for us, when we first enter the workforce, where we're becoming used to not being fans anymore, it's going to be a difficult step for us to take and a difficult transition, but if you do maintain that professionalism and you use more of an analytical approach as opposed to a biased fan perspective approach, then you'll be fine.
So one of the questions that Professor Shore actually asked in the seminar was, have you guys or have you known a journalist that has been too afraid to cover a big story? I think, at some points, it's if you don't know a lot about the subject, even like what just happened with Adam Jones. I know a lot of sports writers wrote posts about it, and it's a hard thing to really be an expert about. And with the whole Hernandez story as well, Greg said he kind of left that to the Metro writers. If he was on the paper, he would have left that to the Metro writers because they have better sources. So what do you guys think of that? Have you ever been too scared to cover a story because it was too big, or do you ever think that you will be?
Maybe someday. I feel like there are topics that are going to be very hard to broach, but I feel like you don't know a journalist unless they've done something big. Yeah, you get the typical beat guys who are there every day just kind of grinding away and making pieces, but you really get your name known once you do something big. So I feel like to know a journalist who hasn't done something big is kind of a rarity nowadays, because I feel like there are so many things to be talked about and everyone wants to talk about everything.
Yeah, breaking a story it's a big thing, but something that Greg Bedard did say is no one remembers who's first. They remember if you got it wrong. Mm-hmm. So accuracy is just as important as speed in this situation of reporting. If you prioritize speed in getting a story out there before anyone else and it's wrong and you don't double-check your sources, you're going to get called out, you're going to be remembered, and you're going to have sort of a black mark on your reputation. But if you're accurate and say you're second, not too far behind the first person who did it, are you still reporting on it? Your sources still backed you up. You still got the story. And, hey, your story might even be better than the person who reported it first because your information is better because you've had time to let it sit, you've had time to figure out what's going on, and you've been able to delve deeper into the subject. So a lot of things that when I was in Little League playing baseball as a pitcher, they said accuracy before speed. Same thing can be said about journalism.
I like that. And another question I wanted to ask you guys, I was talking about it a little bit before we came in here, but a lot of what we've talked about in seminar has been kind of about the past and what's going to be going on in the future. But for you, what do you think, in the next 5 years, 10 years, what do you think the whole sports journalism landscape is going to look like? You think there'll be more video focused, more? I know Pete Blackburn does a great job with the GIFs in the NHL. I think that's going to become a huge thing if the NHL lets it. And then, just the overall, landscape, what do you think it's going to look like?
Well, social media is going to continue to be a huge thing. I think that people less and less are clicking on websites and more so are just looking on Twitter and just looking for those 140-character bytes of information right at there. So I think that Twitter is going to continue to become huge. Yes, GIFs, but also in terms of not necessarily long-form journalism, but instead of maybe writing together a quick 200-word piece, you just throw out 140 characters or 2 or 3 tweets simultaneously. I think that's something that's going to become huge, and the more written pieces you see are going to become traditional journalism, more long-form.
So what you're saying is the bigger stories will still be covered the way they are. They'll still be covered long-form.
Yes, but short-form journalism is going to change drastically and going to transition onto social media.
And not just social media, multimedia. Mm-hmm. And to add to what you said about Twitter, they've actually figured out that Facebook, which was thought to be going extinct when Twitter really came to the forefront, Facebook is more effective at getting stories and links and multimedia out across to viewers because I think the stats, something like 90% of people who like a page will see the Facebook notification pop up, whereas only 10% will see the tweet show up on their timeline because people follow so many people. But multimedia will take a platform. The GIFs that Pete Blackburn does, it might not necessarily be tweeted out, but the NHL or other news sources might choose to use those for web-only stories when describing a goal, and under the paragraph that describes the goal, you throw the GIF in, so they get more of a visual and a description of how that goal looked. Another thing is pictures. For me, when writing for SB Nation, if I'm writing a long-form story about transfers or about academy products who are going to be thriving in the next year or two, it's important to include pictures so that they can associate a name with a face. And in a lot of long-form stories that show up in print and really over the past decade, you've seen pictures start to increase, but before that, it was just one long block of text. Now people with the attention spans lowering and lessening, you're going to need pictures to break up the text and give people something to look at as opposed to just read.
And one thing that I think you might see kind of going along with that, maybe you see more journalists behind the camera too. I think something that has been impressed upon me in my time at BU is learning how to do everything, whether that be behind a video camera, especially behind a photo camera like a DSLR. So I think that maybe someday we'll see more journalists not only writing and using social media and being on TV, but also using DSLRs and coming up with their own photos. Not only is it cost effective, and I think that's something that every company would strive for, but I think it's a great way for journalists to really encompass the whole scope of their work.
Indeed, and one thing Greg Bedard was saying that if you're a reporter, you do need to be multifaceted. I know he's had a couple radio appearances, so it is different on radio than it is in an article. For an article, you have, say, 600, 800 words to make your point, but on radio, you have about 30 seconds to make your point. So for journalists who are multifaceted, it's good to know how to present yourself in different platforms like radio, like print, like television. And Jake, you're right. Behind the camera is going to become huge over the next, I'd say, 5-10 years, because video is certainly becoming more prominent. And not only behind the camera, but behind the computer, like you do with our podcast, like we've all done, I'm sure, over the course of our college career in producing and editing sound for a podcast. It's all going to become majorly important.
And so just kind of one last point to hammer out here. What's one thing that you guys learned in the seminar that you're really going to take away going now into the rest of our lives?
Well, I said it in the paragraph that I sent to Frank. Coming into this class and just throughout my whole life, obviously I've looked up to sports figures. I love the games that I watch, and I love the players that go along with it and their personalities. But kind of what I learned in the Tom Crossett and Gary Washburn seminar, which I thought Todd Crossett, sorry, I thought was one of the best that we've had. I just learned that athletes don't have to be role models, and they don't have to be. They're not required to be. And like Professor Shore said to me after the class when I was talking to him about Ray Bork, the only thing that separates us from them is that they have that talent that gets them that professional sports career. They have, the spotlight. And so I guess what I've learned is that, athletes, you got to just treat them like you would want to be treated, and just don't view them as something, otherworldly. Just come back down to earth and speak to them like you would want to be spoken to.
I know for a fact Greg Bedard said it last week. Catherine Donovan said it a couple weeks earlier. John Wallach said it. It's a tough road. There's a path, but it will be a long road to get to where you want to be. And by staying confident and sticking with it, not getting frustrated, you'll get to where you want to go to. And the thing that resonated the most with me, I think, over the entire semester was what John Wallach said, that once you get to the top, it's the sweetest feeling, because he knows that when he goes home and watches the Red Sox game or the Celtics game for work, it's not work. It's a labor of love, and he won't ever work a day in his life because he's doing what he loves to do, and he paid his dues and climbed the mountain. So, I hate to quote Miley Cyrus, but it's not about how fast you get there. It's about the climb.
I think as far as I go, it's about keeping your nose to the grindstone, and that there really is no off season as a journalist. You gotta always have content going. You always have to find something to do, whether that be a trade, hypothetical, free agent, during the season, getting as many different angles as you can. It's all about just putting out as much content as you can, and that goes along with what you were saying, Dan, that everyone has their own path, but you also have to make your own path. You can't just assume that it's going to be right there in front of you. So by putting out as much as you can, by doing everything in your power to make as much content as humanly possible, that's how you get your start, and that's how you make your way. This feels kind of cathartic to do this one last time with you guys. This is the last thing that I have to do in my college career, and I'm excited and I'm happy that I was able to do it with you guys for the semester.
Yeah, a lot of memories made in the studio, not just throughout this semester, but throughout our 3 years together now. It's been great. I've enjoyed it, especially with you guys.
Yeah, you guys, it's just great. being in here on my last day. I mean, the last day of classes at BU, being in here, and talking into these mics for the last time, and it's sad, it's bittersweet. We're on to the next thing. We're on to starting our careers and starting our young professional lives. So it's exciting, but it's kind of sad. And you guys actually lost a year, so
yeah.
For better or for the worst. But we're all going to be moving up. We're all going to be maybe moving out of here, and it should be an exciting road. And like you said, it's it's bittersweet.
I certainly wish you guys all the best and know that whatever you guys do, you guys will excel. I think I've seen it from not just you guys, but from everyone in the seminar and everyone I've worked with here at WTBU that we're hard workers, and it's something that BU and Professor Shore has instilled in us, and I see success in all of your futures.
Yeah, same with you, Jake and Jordan. I hope we cross paths one day, and hopefully by that point we're bigwig professionals and we're with our families. We can say, hey, we got our start togethers, and now look where we are.
We won't be bigwigs. We'll be just like John Wallach.
That's the hope. That's the hope.
That's the dream.
We'll be doing it as a labor of love, and it's like Frank says, there's no better way to end this podcast but to say that working in sports isn't really working. It beats working for a living. So that's how I still feel about it after this seminar series, and I think that's how I'm going to feel about it for the rest of my career.
I think all of us will carry that into our lives for the very foreseeable future. And so that's going to be it for the final time here on To Be Frank, alongside Jordan Tebow and Dan Schulman. I'm Jake Reiser, signing off.
I like what you got. Good job.